Hi, I'm Steve, and welcome to Sights Less Seen, where I visit those maybe not so well-known places that you may not see in the normal tourist guide. Today, I'm in Pittsburg, Pennsylvania, visiting the Carrie blast furnaces, which were part of the Carnegie Steel Corporation from about 1880s to 1980s. Pittsburgh is known as the Steel City, and for good reason. At its peak in 1910, the steel industry in Pittsburgh produced more than 60% of the total production in the United States. The best way to get a grasp of how huge this industry was is to visit the Carrie blast furnace site, built in 1884 by the brothers H.C. and W.C. Phones, and purchased by Andrew Carnegie in 1898. The site is named for William Clark's daughter, Carrie, who first lit the fire to the furnaces. Now, William Clark was the uncle of the Phones brothers, but he was also the president and manager of this site. These two remaining furnaces were once part of a set of 7 at this site, and 2 of 48 furnaces situated around Pittsburgh. Seeing the size of these 2 will give you a sense of the immensity of this industry around Pittsburgh and of the domination of the steel industry. You can also imagine the amount of pollution that these 48 furnaces produced. There were times when the sun couldn't even shine through to the city. Before we talk any more about the blast furnaces, let's talk a little bit about Andrew Carnegie. Now, he was a Scottish-American industrialist who led the expansion of the American steel industry in the late 19th century and became one of the richest Americans in history. Carnegie was born in Scotland and immigrated to Pittsburgh with his parents in 1848 at the age of 12. He started work as a telegrapher, and by the 1860s, in his mid-20s, he had investments in railroads, railroad sleeping cars, bridges, and oil derricks. He built Pittsburgh's Carnegie Steel Company, which he sold to J.P. Morgan in 1901 for over $10.5 billion. It formed the basis of the U.S. Steel Corporation. He became a leading philanthropist in the United States, Great Britain, and the British Empire. During the last 18 years of his life, he gave away around $5.9 billion, almost 90% of his fortune, to charities, foundations, and universities. Towering 92 feet over the Monongahela River, constructed of 2.5-inch thick steel plate and lined with refractory brick, the Carrie furnaces are extremely rare examples of pre-World War II iron-making technology and are among the only pre-World War II 20th century blast furnaces to survive. Since the collapse of the region's big steel industry in the 1970s and 1980s, these are the only non-operating blast furnaces in the region that remain. The Carrie furnace site is located in Swissville, Pennsylvania, just south of Pittsburgh. The site had formed a part of a National Homestead Steelworks belonging to Carnegie. Now, I'm not going to try to explain the whole process to you. I'll let the tour guides do that for you. Suffice it to say that the blast furnaces are used to produce pig iron from iron ore for subsequent processing into steel, and they are also employed in processing lead, copper, and other metals. Rapid combustion is maintained by the current of air under pressure. They are brick-lined stainless steel stacks, which are heated using preheated air. Limestone, coke, and iron ore are placed in the blast furnace and heated. This was accomplished by manually dumping these materials into the furnace from the top. And remember, I said that was 92 feet up in the air. This was hard, hot, and extremely dangerous work, and it produced carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Since people at this time were not really aware of the danger of these gases, many of the men at the top of a furnace were overcome. Now, the hot blast temperature can be anywhere from 1600 to 2300 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the stove design and the condition. The temperatures they deal with could be anywhere from 3600 to 4200 degrees Fahrenheit. Think about this as a side note. There were 48 of these blast furnaces around Pittsburgh, producing all of its carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and all of the other pollutants. This had to be one of the worst places to live at that time. As I mentioned earlier, the Carrie furnaces were built in 1884, and they operated until 1982, almost 100 years. During its peak in the 1950s and 1960s, this site produced 1,000 to 1,250 tons of iron per day. These two furnaces, which operated from 1907 to 1978, were designated a National Historic Landmark in 2006. The cast house might be the most eye-catching of the site's locations. Channels run through the floor, carving a way for the iron to flow after a worker tapped a hole in the furnace, which would spew molten metal out. This job was one of the most dangerous on the site, as sparks could fly as far as the other end of the building. The floor of a cast house and the edges of the channels are splattered with hardened iron that you can still see today. Just imagine all of this liquefied metal at somewhere around 4,200 degrees Fahrenheit that may have actually hit the workers. Workers were often immigrants who migrated to America from various European countries, and people from the American South came here in hopes of living a better life. Because of this, many different languages were spoken around the furnaces, meaning warning signs on the site were written in multiple languages. During all the years of operation, many changes were made to the blast furnaces, but they remained virtually unchanged after 1936. This outdated technology was one of the chief reasons that these two furnaces were the first ones shut down when the complex began to shut down. It was also the reason that these two furnaces were chosen for preservation. One of the things that I think is interesting is the graffiti that you see on the site. It's not surprising that a place like Carrie Furnace would have issues with graffiti, particularly since it was sitting abandoned for so many years. To combat this, Carrie Furnace works with the art community and allows sections of the facility to be used by graffiti artists. This cooperation has greatly reduced the amount of unwanted graffiti on the site, and what I think is really interesting is to contrast all the colors that the artists use with this harsh, rusted, old metal of the previously abandoned furnaces. To visit the site, you'll need to make a reservation for a tour with Rivers of Steel Carrie blast furnaces. You can't just walk around the site by yourself. Now, the tours go from Wednesday through Sunday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Keep in mind that you can't take videos on the site. You can take as many photos as you want, but they do not allow you to take any videos. So just keep that in mind when you do go. Now, there are three other spots I want to briefly mention that I think are well worth going to while you're visiting Pittsburgh, and we'll talk about those right now. Come aboard the USS Requin to learn how 80 men used their expertise and ingenuity to carve out a rough and adventurous life during its lengthy defense and scientific missions, some of which are still classified to this day. It was state-of-the-art and battle-ready when it set out just days before the end of World War II. It also holds the distinction of being the Navy's first radar picket submarine, and I'll let the guides explain that to you. I really find this interesting to see how a crew lived in a 1940s, 1950s era submarine and how cramped it is. By today's standards, it's not very big at all, only a little over 311 feet long, 27 feet wide, and 49 feet high, with a weight of about 1,500 tons. It has a range of 11,000 miles at a speed of 21 knots on the surface and 10 knots submerged, and had a crew of 10 officers and 75 to 90 enlisted men. It was built in 1944 and completed one war patrol before the end of World War II. After serving in multiple capacities for over 4 decades, it was decommissioned in 1968. It continued its service as a Naval Reserve training vessel before being sold to the Carnegie Science Center here in Pittsburgh in 1990. Point State Park is a place that has always served as a gateway and hub of activity for the city. It sits at the confluence of Pittsburgh's 3 rivers, the Allegheny, Monongahela, and the Ohio, and offers broad views of the city. Throughout the grounds of the park, you can see the outlines of 2 forts that were erected at the point during the French and Indian Wars. In 1754, the French built Fort Duquesne, and in 1758, after the British had defeated the French, Fort Pitt was built. The Fort Pitt Museum and the Fort Pitt Blockhouse provide insight into life in those days. Dating back to 1764, the blockhouse is believed to be the oldest building in the city of Pittsburgh and west of the Alleghenies, although that point is still considered debatable. The history alone is worth a visit to the point, but the vistas of the city make this place a spot that you must visit. And finally, there are 6 locations that provide spectacular views of Pittsburg. Now, you probably won't have time to visit all 6, but you should definitely take time during your visit to the blast furnaces to visit at least one of them. Each of these places have beautiful vistas of Pittsburg, but each also has something unique to itself. One has a beautiful old church that's on the National Historic Records. Another has beautiful views of the confluence of the 3 rivers along with Point Park. One has inclines to the top of the hill, and another even has a graffiti park. Okay, that's my visit to the Carrie blast furnace here in Pittsburg. Always wanted to come to this place, finally got a chance to do it. And when you do see it, it's just amazing. It's unbelievable how big this place is. Those towers are 92 feet high. And think about this, those are only 2. There were 7 at this location alone. Think of how huge that was, let alone the 48 all around the Pittsburgh area. Now, they employed thousands and thousands of people for about 100 years. They produced millions and millions of tons of steel and iron, and probably about the same amount, millions of tons of pollution, all falling down on the Pittsburgh area. Oh, don't forget, USS Requin submarine. Great thing to see. Really gives you an idea of what it was like in a submarine back in the 40s and 50s eras. Also, Point State Park, at the confluence of the Ohio, Monongahela, and the Allegheny. I think I said that right. And also, don't forget the vistas. Go to one of the vistas and overlook Pittsburgh. You'll see how pretty it is. So I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Steve. I'll see you next time on Sights Less Seen.